Excellent. Let's go ahead and get the meeting started, please, at 1:12. I want to thank everybody for being here today. We do have a sign-in sheet that's going around, so please feel free to sign in. And Ruby, could you please do task force roll call?
Yes. Catherine Vanderwall. Here. Nara Delbaca. Here. Rebecca Harper. Here. Jennifer Smith. Here. Fire District Representative, which are not here. William Wise.
Present.
Richmond Kelly.
Here.
And Robert Geary, which is not present.
Thank you. Next item is consideration of the draft minutes from October 29th. If the task force has any questions, we can take those down, or we can open up for public input. I'll just give you all a minute to glance. I thought it was open, but
It's allowed. Okay.
or if I want you to look at, the ones on the agenda. March 13. All right, is there any public input on the draft minutes from October 29th? If so, please feel free to raise your hand. Unless you're in the room with us, you can just wave. Seeing no questions, we'll bring it back to the task force for action and discussion. Possible motion.
Small typo on page 2. Waiting for a permanent power or awaiting permanent power down at the bottom of the recommendations. So number 2, it says waiting permanent power. I would suggest either awaiting or waiting for.
Where's the one that I see waiting for permanent power? I don't see the other one though.
But she's saying that the language ought to be updated to be awaiting.
Awaiting.
Or waiting for permanent power. There's a missing word there. Make it awaiting.
Okay. Any other changes necessary?
Catherine, not to put words in your mouth, but does that definition of pesticide appearing on page 5 seem thorough and what have you?
Is that what you're
It looks like it. Is that what I emailed you guys?
Yeah. You just copy and paste it.
The code section, yeah.
What's an adjuvant?
Looks like an additive to enhance things.
Any spray adjuvant. Okay.
Right. So California sees spray adjuvants as pesticides.
Okay.
Yeah. The only thing, I guess, the last sentence, the use of pesticides, that's not part of the definition. So I don't know if you want to make that just like a separate line or something.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, it kind of bleeds into each other. It looks like it's all part of the definition.
Good. This paper feels thick. So whenever you're ready, if someone wants to make a motion, that'd be great.
I'll move to accept and file or approve, in this case, the October 29th, 2024 minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to discussion and consideration of 73.4, restrictions and prohibited activities, the cannabis or commercial cannabis exclusion zones. You can find these on page 22 of your agenda packet. Okay, so Michelle will be joining us in a few minutes. She was just picking up Cam from daycare, so she'll attend by Zoom in probably just a couple minutes. She did a deep dive over public lands, subsection C. Where did we leave off, Mary? Do you remember?
We were discussing all of these aspects. I think we touched on every single one of them individually. Then there was a discussion to break them apart into subsections as A, B, C. And I'm not quite sure if we have finished that conversation.
I have in my notes that we did some discussion on the 1,000 feet, maybe moving that to 600, but we did set that aside for more information. So what's the will of the task force? Should we pick up the 1,000 feet, or should we go on talking about the different subsections?
I mean, I think we need to come to consensus regarding the setback distance at some point to move through this agenda item, so I don't know if
We
taking
can
that now
either
or
do it now or we
postponing
can
it
do it at the
later.
end.
I would say that I received a significant amount of feedback from community members, requesting that we maintain the 1,000-foot setback. So.
Also, just a reminder, since the Zoom folk can't always see us very clearly, if you want to say your name when you're speaking, that'll help them to sort of follow the conversation.
That was Rebecca Harper, Zoom folk.
Excellent.
So, are we open for discussion on this?
Yep.
Okay, so some of the things that I was thinking about, some of these exclusion areas are unique to the county and some are the same as the state. So I'm wondering if we can look at the ones that are the same as the state. I also think that there should be some consideration. One of the topics here is setbacks for larger farms. And so I think if you're co-locating multiple licenses, we look at a 1,000-foot setback, but try and get I just like to look at each one by one, knowing that I would be willing to discuss a further setback for large farms. If there's an appetite for that.
What's the threshold between big and not big?
I would say over an acre.
Well, if we're using the state's definition for a large license type, it would be 5 acres.
Yeah, I was just basing it on
Whatever.
the previous system. When we co-located 10,000 increments.
And because an acre is still, it's under an acre at the state, it's still small, right? So under the state definition, there's small, medium, and large.
So how about then, that's not actually included in this batch of exclusion areas, but we'll make note of that. And then, because that can come in later on when we're talking about development standards for setbacks.
Yeah, and it was on the topics of consideration.
And I think one of the areas that we haven't discussed yet as a task force is the potential opening of other areas to cultivate or smaller parcel sizes. If we were to look at, I think there was some discussion about that early on. But if it became a percentage of the parcel size or something like that, somebody wanted to do a really small cottage grow, it may not be achievable for them to get the 1,000 feet. But they may only be growing 50 plants, right?
Okay.
I think I've got neighbors in Hidden Valley growing more.
Okay,
That was Nara, double.
let's get back to the exclusion areas.
Am I allowed to comment?
Yeah, let's open it up for public input on the 1,000. We're kind of talking about what we're going to talk about right now. So, yeah.
1,000 foot setback.
Yeah, we're either talking about doing the 1,000 foot, like having that discussion now, or maybe doing it later and moving on to the A's through J's.
Jen, were you suggesting that we, though, add size levels here for that exclusion zone? Is that what you were
To
doing?
some degree, yeah, I wanted to look at which of these were state setbacks and which were local, and align ourselves with the state on those that,
You use a state one.
But for example, like the schools are something that's outlined in the state code, right? So that would mean we would move to 600 feet for the schools,
Right, so
which I know a lot of the
EF, G, and
public
H.
has voiced disagreement with. So I don't know how beneficial it would be to break them up that way. I think that, at least from the folks I've heard from, even some of the categories that also exist at the state are problematic for them.
So it sounds like we're talking about the 1,000 foot setback.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, we have to discuss it now or later, so we might as well just
Yeah, now it's fine,
While we're in it,
do it.
right? Okay.
did we need to hear from the public?
That's what that's what I was gonna go next. Excellent. Please go ahead, state your name so the Zoom people can hear you.
I'm Bill Wilson. I would be in favor of at least 1,000 foot setback, primarily because of the environmental impact of riparian water. Most wells that are within 1,000 foot are recharged by riparian water, and the Cannabis cultivation policy says that between April 1 and October 1, you're not allowed to use riparian water. So anything closer than 1,000 foot to the major creeks in the lake would be a concern to have at least 1,000 feet away.
So at least 1,000 foot setback due to preservation for riparian and water courses.
Correct.
Okay. Is there any further public input regarding the 1,000 foot setback?
Yes. Cannot read that name.
I think that's all.
Good.
That's Peter Lucetti.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay.
P. Luch. Yeah, Peter Lucetti. I mean, that's what I would.
Go ahead, please.
I'm just checking if you can hear me.
Just barely.
Can you hear me better now? I'm trying to get closer to the
It's
mic.
improving. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it could be our volume.
I just want to, get my 2 cents on the table on the 1,000 feet. We're an organic cattle operation, and to be less than 1,000 feet from a cannabis growing operation presents a number of challenges, whether it's pesticide use or water use. I certainly want to support the gentleman's comment about water use and then waterways. In our case, we have a significant portion, probably 3 miles of Peter Creek running through the ranch. And anything close to that, I think, is a sensitive environmental issue as well. So I really feel strongly about the 1,000 feet and maybe even more when it comes to pesticide use. I think I would refer to Catherine Vanderwall and drift issues and seeing if we can get a little bit better data-centric approach to this as it relates to pesticide use. Thank you.
Mr. Lucetti, just for clarification, it sounds like you're talking about 1,000 foot setback from an operation on a different parcel, not necessarily 1,000 foot setback from subsection A through I. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct.
All right, I just want to make sure we're clear. Thank you. Go ahead, Holly, as soon as you get unmuted.
Oh, hi, Holly Harris. I would like to suggest maybe saying it's prohibited within a minimum 1,000 foot setback, just because that then allows some flexibility with the planners as they're working with someone for any unusual situations that may occur. Additionally, I do want to remind you that when you voted on the retail sales setbacks in March 13th, it was a majority wanting to maintain 1,000 foot setback from that. Thank you.
Thanks, Holly. Any other public input in the Zoom room?
Currently, no.
All right, so let's bring it back to the task force for discussion, please.
Can I ask if cattle are required to be 1,000 feet from a waterway? Is that?
There's setbacks at the state level that we already mirror. Water courses.
Okay. Let her work on that. This is the part where you all discuss. And I record.
Richmond Kelly again, started probably this whole thing. The 1,000-foot thing, I have no issues with any of it. What I kind of challenges me with this whole process is, what does the research and data tell us? Like, why 1,000 feet? They need to be 2,000. Look, my point is, if we don't have the research and data telling us why we're pushing it out that far, how do we know we're pushing it out that far, or why we're pushing it out that far? Is it doing what you think it's doing? Is it? We're back to metrics again. I hate to go back there, but if it's 1,000 feet, it's easy if you don't build policy on top of factual research data, you're eroding the credibility of that policy. So I'm just wondering, the state got to 600 feet. I'm just trying to figure out why they got to 600. So if going to 1,000 makes our county feel like, okay, we're gonna get this plus this, it'll do, make it even better for the environment, I'm all for it. I just want to know that we actually know what we're talking about when we say 1,000 feet. Because it's a great number. I like the number 2, it sounds, but maybe it needs to be 2,000, or maybe it needs to be 600. I just want to make sure we're getting what we think we're getting out of it.
Right.
And how do we know that?
Rebecca Harper, I'm just curious, Richmond, what your proposed solution would be to the perceived lack of data behind that number.
Is there a lack of data? I guess that's my question. If the state of California came up with something, the kind of resources they have, there's got to be data out there, is my point. It would make us all feel better, because maybe 1,000 is not enough for what we think it's getting us, or maybe it's way too much. That's all I'm saying.
I think 1,000 feet is not enough, because there is enough resources to say that it should be farther, because outdoor grows, especially highly concentrated, produce a lot of VOCs, and we have no control over air drift and wind drift. So it's proven that the VOCs are bad for the environment, are bad for respiratory of animals and wildlife. VOCs, terpenes will get on the leaves and they'll restrict photosynthesis. So the farther the better, just because of the environmental impact that an outdoor grow can grow with all of that uncontrolled spreading of the terpenes.
Right. So we're talking about, I guess once again, I would feel better knowing that we actually have data that tells us what that spread is. I don't question anything you're saying about the spread. I live in an area where it smells like it's spreading, at least 1,000 feet. But to help the industry, which is struggling, and to help ourselves and the environment, I just think knowing some of this data, once again, we're back to odor, and we're back to things that can be measured if we have the money to research. I'm just saying, I just want to make sure that isn't out there somewhere. I assume it must be.
There were not studies that were presented as a basis for 1,000 square feet when the board made their decision on it. It was a policy decision.
There is a study from the Denver Public Health and Environment that done by the Wang that shows how far the spread would be from areas. And so there is more than 1,000 feet. It shows a map how the terpenes turn into ozone will spread. So there is some information that says how far it'll spread and why it'll spread and what it'll do when it spreads.
There was also no discussion of the 1,000-foot setback being specific to terpene spread or proximity of cannabis terpene, like terpenes being the issue.
Right.
It was more just, where do we not want to see cannabis grown?
There's a number of studies out of Santa Barbara as well, where there was some back and forth with the grape growers and cannabis showing the opposite. So there's not really settled science on this, that that didn't affect the flavor, smells, or anything of the grapes that were growing adjacent. And that was, two industries kind of going at each other with competing studies. And So I don't know that we get it. I would be open to discussing, I hate to constantly throw things back, at the county, but at some kind of discretionary process with the, where the county is able to say, this seems like, with a minimum of 600 feet, but recommended 1,000 feet or more, based on the discretion of the county development department. But I don't know if you want that.
Should we repeat that, please?
Yeah. So I would be open to having this be more discretionary as a project by project basis. Maybe we know it's a 600-foot minimum. The county generally encourages 1,000 feet, but having that be at the discretion for a minimum of 600 or even more than 1,000. If the community development department analyzed the project and thought that it needed more or
What data would the department use to make such a determination?
I don't know. The
Generally-
same data we use to determine 1,000 feet or the state.
So we have to really be careful whenever we give discretion to the planning division, particularly on which is what I see as a policy decision from the board. There are some areas where discretion is great, but it's not usually making things more restrictive. It's starting with I'm not amenable to your request.
Okay.
Let's not give the discretion to the department. So, because it would be tough for us we have no thresholds to go from 600 to 1,000. So we'd be making a decision that would be easy to attack, and we don't like to do those.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, awesome.
I think in order to do that, hard as it is to say, I think the only real way is to not use the mitigated never declarations, but have an environmental impact report, because they are going to be able to say what the water is like, what the air drift is like, what the terpenes amount is going to be on large creeks. So I don't know who is qualified to determine the water, the odor, the electricity usages other than a professional EIR.
So in the state guidelines for the California Environmental Equality Act, EIRs are triggered when it is determined that mitigations are not available to lower the impact of potential impact on the environment of a project. You don't just say everything will have an EIR. You have to go through an analysis process to determine what level of review is appropriate.
It says it determines whether the project may have significant adverse effect on the environment. If such an effect may occur, the lead agency must prepare an environmental impact report. That's from the California Environmental Quality Act.
Yes,
definition.
I think we're saying the same thing, just using different words. Yeah.
But so there is the potential, they say the potential for environmental damage or harm.
Right.
And there is the potential, so that's an EIR.
In the state's terminology, they refer to an environmental impact report for an initial study level of report, as well as what we call the full-blown EIR. They just want to make sure that the analysis is done such that the potential impacts on the environment are taken into account and looked at and analyzed. And if it can't be mitigated, if the impacts can't be taken down to a less than significant, that's when it would trigger the more in-depth environmental impact report.
And the state has been saying there's substantial evidence that says that the mitigation gets deferred and the measures are insufficient to avoid any harm. So that's saying that if you go with the MND and somebody gets started there's no follow-up to stop what they're doing if their harm is coming. Whereas an environmental impact report, supposedly a professional one, tells you what the chances of something are, not just if the permittee says, well, this is what I'm going to do, and then if it doesn't get done, what happens?
So in all of the over 100 cannabis projects that we have approved, with most of them with mitigated negative declarations, it does have the mitigations listed in the conditions of approval. When we receive complaints and find that the permittees are operating outside of those conditions of approval, where we are able to, we're encouraging them and walking alongside them and monitoring to make sure that those conditions are replaced, that they get back into compliance with those conditions. If they choose not to do so, or if we have chronic violations, that's when we're thinking about a revocation recommendation of the permit.
Has that happened?
Was a couple of them, yeah. We have 3 that have happened so far. So they're within the,
Are we in public comment?
oh, that's true, huh? We're kind of having a discussion rather than comment, so. But I'd be happy to talk with you about it offline further, just so you understand our processes.
Rebecca Harper, I just had a question back to what Jen had mentioned earlier. Jen, if we were talking about increased setbacks for larger sized farms, what would you recommend that look like?
Not really sure.
Setback wise, at least. I know you mentioned anything more than an acre.
And this is, and I'm talking about just related to the sensitive uses.
Right.
I mean, I think the state minimum is probably good for some of these really small farms.
We're talking about co-located more than 1 acre.
Okay. So anything, right?
Yeah.
So anything less than an acre, could be the state limit. Anything more than an acre could be the 1,000 feet.
But they're asking would we consider more than 1,000?
Because Jen had mentioned she thinks that there may be reason to have larger than 1,000 setbacks for farms that are larger. So I'm not necessarily talking about lowering
it for smaller
the
farms.
smaller farms. I'm just,
And smaller farms also, I think, have a better ability to plant around and do some of the other mitigations that may be easier to block smell too, just with the footprint size. But I would want 1,500
feet, 2,000 feet. What?
I would consider, I'd look at 1,500.
We do still have additional public input if we want to continue with that, make sure we hit everybody. Go ahead. Oh, you are okay? Oh, okay, good. Feel free to jump in next time. Like, you're a little out of my peripheral view.
Sorry, yeah.
That's okay. Let's go to the Zoom.
What does this really affect? How many farms are this close to any of these sensitive use areas?
This is very helpful when people are looking at potential locations.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we have had some that where this impacted them, and we caught it at the pre-app stage. So
I just feel like if we're spending a lot of time on something that might not really be, I mean, I can't imagine that there's anybody that's gonna plant, all the schools are in town. Public parks, I mean, I think where it's really
public lands,
is public lands.
community growth boundaries possibly too. There may be like ag land up against a community, up against a community growth boundary where somebody may, the plantable part of the land may be within.
So where you're going to see these types of projects is close to BLM land, state parks, community growth boundaries, as previously mentioned, like the Kelseyville area. That's where these projects currently exist, and there's about 10 to 15 of these projects that I can think of that would be affected by this.
Well, so people who already have their existing projects, would they be impacted or would they be grandfathered in?
Are these
It's just no new projects would occur.
So,
but this has been in place since when? The 1,000 feet has been in place since
I
when?
think the increasing from the 1,000 feet. My guess is these folks would have, if they're in the pipeline, right, or already approved, then then they've had to be 1,000 feet.
Yeah, they would have had been 1,000 feet. So there shouldn't be anybody that's within 1,000 feet of any of these exclusionary zones.
So with that, these use permits are also a life of 10 years. So there is a reapplication process at the end of the 10-year life. So that's something to consider as well.
We need to adopt language around potentially protecting that as well. I mean, if we're diving into the nitty-gritty to protect those projects, the existing non-conforming.
We already have a section in the zoning code for legal non-conforming uses.
Okay, and so they would cite that when they came back for a 10-year reapplication.
I don't know, we have not actually had renewals
Right.
of cannabis, so it'll be interesting to see how the planning commission deals with that, because legal non-conforming use doesn't necessarily, if we handled it not as new permits, but rather as extensions of permits, then the legal non-conforming entitlements would continue. If they're looked at as new permits, that would not be the case.
So basically, if it was an
Necessarily.
amendment to the use permit and something had changed, a project component had changed, it would be a new use permit, not eligible for use permit extension.
However, yeah, and so we really haven't, we're kind of thinking through this right now. Use permits follow the land, so if it is an extension, then it is likely that the legal non-conforming entitlement would continue, because the way we handle that, when with all of our other questions of legal non-conforming use, is that it can continue as a similar use. It can't enlarge and it can't change, otherwise it reverts back to current conditions and regulations. So we'll have to really think about that when we start drafting our staff reports, when we start doing these renewals or extensions of 10 years.
So based off the usable data then, what we talked about, then I would recommend you always go with the community side of things. If 1,000 feet is what makes people feel better, and I'm all for it. Because I haven't heard, I couldn't find it myself, usable data that could tell me why. So if that's not the case, then I would say we leave it at 1,000 feet and move forward.
What about 1,000 feet plus discretion
Yeah,
per
I
project?
think discretion is always important, but I think 1,000 foot is what the community wants. And I'm all for it, but my question was always, how did we get to 1,000 feet? And that's not going to be answered, maybe not anytime
It
soon.
was arbitrary.
Yeah, and but arbitrary, like I said, feel-good numbers mean something, and it's community goodwill, and I don't mind it. I just thought there was, there should be data supporting it. And there will be at some point.
When you say discretionary, you mean like if they see an application for a larger grow area, they may require more distance, not that they could decrease the distance. That's allowable.
We don't want to do that.
Yeah.
We need to have it in the regulations.
And be consistent.
Yeah.
Let's just leave it at 1,000.
How about we continue hearing public input, and then we'll bring it back to the task force. I don't see any hands in the room. Let's go to Zoom. Angela, looks like you're up first.
Thank you, Maria. I'm going to say I agree with Richmond that while there isn't any data that supports where that 1,000-foot setback came from, we've got to remember this policy was all new 6 years ago, so we didn't know what we would be looking at 6 years down the road. At the time, the Board of Supervisors felt strongly about the 1,000-foot setback. I haven't heard of anybody complaining that 1,000-foot setback should be reduced. There are people that feel that it should be increased. And I guess I would just like to know what's the reasoning and thoughts behind lowering the setback, because I don't think we're running out of space. And then, since it mostly surrounds public lands, because as someone said, that the schools and all of that, I think it was Jennifer, that all the schools and everything are really in town, so you're not putting grows in that area. So it's more aimed towards public lands. I'm just curious, has any requests been sent to BLM or the Department of the Interior for their input on what kind of setbacks they would like to see from public lands on their end?
No.
The U.S. Forest Service Area Resources Program has researched that. They haven't set a setback, but they can definitely say from cannabis growing, it is harming the animals in the area and the plants. That was through, like say, the U.S. Forest Service Air Resource Program.
Okay, so I would say I would say if the 1,000-foot setback has been good for us for this many years. I don't see a reason to lower it, and I think it was mentioned at the last meeting that since the Board of Supervisors felt so strongly about it, if we're trying to get things that they're going to approve, lowering the setback might not be something they want to see either. So, thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Go ahead, Sarah. And Mr. Wilson, if we could just keep.
Good afternoon.
Wilson, well, let's just keep public input instead of a dialogue. Thanks.
This is Sarah Partner, consultant. I want to start by saying that anytime we're talking about some kind of metric that's been set arbitrarily, it gets really muddy. And so I think this discussion is, reflective of how hard it is to set a fixed number, which then becomes like a cookie cutter that has to apply to so many different contexts. And, from the experience of an applicant, the setback can make the difference between farming on a part of your property that actually makes sense to farm on, that it's flat, it's not near water courses, but it happens to be arbitrarily close to some other border. This presents a lot of challenges in terms of project design and also in terms of property rights and being able to use what's yours and rightfully you own. And yet we also have to set a number. So I think as we're thinking about a number, in this particular case, this is something that has been much deliberated by the board, such that there was even a specific ordinance set around public lands. And probably, it's prudent to stick with what the board already deliberated here, which kind of goes against my own sensibilities, which is that I would like to always align with state law everywhere as much as possible, and then use kind of a more discretionary process and say, okay, well, what is the nature of these specific public lands? What is the nature of this specific parcel? And leave that to the site-specific review process. But in this case, I do agree, with that setbacks are arbitrary and imperfect and cause a lot of problems from the program design and from community input. And in this case, I think sticking with what the board deliberated is probably the wisest path. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Seeing no further hands raised in Zoom, we'll bring it back to the task force for discussion.
It sounds like we have consensus and that we're ready for a motion. I think Richmond wants to make a motion.
The motion to keep it the same, you mean?
Yeah.
1,000 feet?
Was that a motion?
I will make a motion to keep it as stated, 1,000 feet.
For A through J.
For A through, you said, oh, sorry, with my glasses, A through J.
It's actually A through I.
Oh, there's more.
J just talks about how the distance is measured.
Okay. I will make a motion to keep 1,000 feet, A through I on the station sites.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, motion passes. Excellent. Now we'll go on to the A through I themselves. Let's handle it this way. Are there any items listed in A through I that the task force would like to see removed from the list?
I was just curious where we had landed after the last meeting on Clear Lake as public lands.
Good. This is a good moment. I think Michelle, is she on?
She is.
Excellent. Michelle's the one who did a lot of review on that one since the last meeting. Go ahead, Michelle, and bring us up to date on what you found.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Did a bit of research by watching.
Actually, we can't hear you very well.
Oh, really?
Oh, there you are. Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'll just scoot closer. I did a lot of research by reviewing old staff reports and watching videos, as well as minutes from that whole time frame of when the board clarified public lands in 2020. And a lot of it referenced essentially how there wasn't a ton of discussion when all of this was first developed and implemented around public lands. The 2020 discussion was somewhat specific to these large swaths of BLM lands. So to cut to the chase here, there wasn't a lot of specific discussion about Clear Lake. I didn't find anything. I also did shoot an email over to County Council and haven't heard back, but there was nothing that I could find regarding Clear Lake itself. It was more about developed facilities.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That does make sense when you know that the activities that are listed are land-based rather than on the water. So if the task force wanted to add Clear Lake to public lands, they would do so via a recommendation that would get forwarded to the board. But back to, is there anything on this list you all want to see taken off? And if not, then we can go over, is there anything that task force would like to see changed? Does everybody know what the SOS combining district is? Those are our paper parcels. They're substandard older subdivisions. You'll see thousands of them in East Lucerne hillsides. They are, they have this overlay or this combining district because it notes the significant slopes, the unstable soils, and the complete lack of infrastructure, as well as the challenges to installing infrastructure at that location in the future. So they're commonly called the paper parcels because they were created by writing their, by subdivision standards that are grossly outdated with today's health and safety regulations. In order to develop these parcels, you'd have to build an actual road that could accommodate fire trucks from the closest county road all the way up to your parcel. In doing so, you'd have to actually widen it bigger than it exists currently in the subdivision. So you'd have to work with all the property owners that are between the county road and you to get slices of their parcels to accommodate the road size. Yeah. Also probably mainline water district if your parcel, which tend to be very tiny, could not accommodate both a septic and a well. So it's pretty cost prohibitive to develop out there.
Tiny being what, like less than 1/10 of an acre, less than a quarter acre?
I defer to EH's regulations.
There's a bunch of them that are like a third.
Oh, yeah, what size? Yeah, they're small, yeah.
The county sold.
Not even 6,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Some of these are really small. And Holly's done a lot of study. Holly Harris was really helpful when the board was doing the paper subdivision management plan, and she had pictures of maps where the parcels are divided, all sliced along this big, huge rock outcrop. So you know, they were designed on paper. They were not designed realistically, given the land that's in front of us. That image still has stuck with me forever. That's just one of those. I think everything else is pretty well self-explanatory. You guys are familiar with community growth boundaries. So if nothing removed, is there anything the task force would like to see amended? And this is where a recommendation to add Clear Lakes to public lands would come in if the task force wants to do that. Which would create a 1,000 foot setback from the lake. And it would be at 7.79 Rumsey, so full lake level, back to, but it would only affect cultivation at this point. Not other businesses.
Yeah, I think that could end up affecting some of the existing permitted dispensaries.
This pertains only to cultivation.
Exactly, were we to expand it.
Correct.
Is there a chance of is there a map that we could look at of Clear Lake that we could kind of try to envision what that 1,000 feet looks like?
We could request an overlay, or you can just, take a look at that and just imagine a tiny little buffer.
And is that cultivation outdoor and greenhouse combined, or just outdoor?
It would include commercial cannabis cultivation. So, outdoor, mixed light, and indoor.
I'd be interested to hear from the public before we have further discussion.
We have one hand up in Zoom. Anybody in the room wanting to speak to this exclusion zones? Let's go to Zoom. Is that Holly?
Yeah, it's Holly.
Go ahead, Holly.
Oh, hi. I was curious if all of you got the memo that I sent in that Ruby was green sheeting.
Yep, we've got it.
Okay. So if you read it, basically, I gave you a definition from the State Lands Commission Public Access Guide, which says that public lands include the tide and submerged lands on the Pacific coast, as well as world-famous waters such as Lake Tahoe, Mono Lake, and the Colorado River. So besides these lakes, it also includes the beds of navigable rivers, streams, as well as lakes. Additionally, Maria, you may recall that when we had the land clarity hearing, that this was in 8/11/22. You halted the hearing to go check on that, and the project consultant Trey Sherrill said that, and you can watch the video, stated that when he found out about this, he consulted with county council and they agreed that Clear Lake was public land, so their project was redrawn to reflect the 1,000-foot setback. Thank you.
Thanks, Holly. Anyone else for public input on this item?
Not in Zoom.
We'll bring it back to the task force for discussion and action.
It seems logical based on what we discussed before, and also protecting water-based other things. It's a logical move to protect the lake, I would think, right? And I would think the public, obviously I'm going to speak for them, but I'm one of them, but yeah, I mean, it makes sense that you would want that. For just on cultivation.
And I mean, additionally, we don't have too many navigable rivers or streams, so.
Not a debate we want to start.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Depends on the vessel you can put
Is
in
there an
there.
agriculture setback at all for the lake for grapes or livestock or other agricultural products? Just clarity question.
But, I mean, I don't have a setback, no.
And we don't do permitting for traditional ag.
I would encourage the some parity on that from our environmental friends. If you guys are going to come at cannabis, there's a lot of there's other runoff. I think cannabis is ag, and this is I would like cannabis to be treated as other ag. That's my soapbox today.
But we're talking about treating Clear Lake as public lands. And what we're applying the setback to, so.
Right, but there's not the same 1,000-foot setback for agriculture. So I would love for us to, that needs to be changed at the federal and the state level. And I would love for us to look at this again.
There's also almost 20 years of information regarding agricultural runoff into Clear Lake through the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. So I would say, there's quite a bit of information there that supports negligible runoff from agricultural lands into the lake, whereas that same information doesn't exist with regards to cannabis. So.
And I hope that we look at that and we, I would like to see cannabis move into, the same treatment as ag, not ag move into the same treatment as cannabis. I don't think that our food system could survive it. So I hope we move there one day in a future task force.
Do we currently have any cultivation projects within 1,000 feet?
Yes, there are 2 projects that are approved.
That are approved.
Within 1,000 feet of the lake.
Yes.
So how are those projects impacted when the lake's like at flood stage? Are they underwater?
No, they're not.
Where are they located?
So one is on Sulphur Bank Drive and the other is on North Drive, which is off of Sulphur Bank.
I'm looking at the map.
Where's the other one? North Drive? So where Sulphur Bank is. We are, let's see. I'll give you a better idea. It's this area here, the Sulphur Bank project here, and then North Drive up here on the hill.
North Drive is on the state road.
But to be clear, if this definition were to be changed to include, this is Will Weiss, by the way, if the definition were to be changed or clarified to indicate that Clear Lake is part of public lands, those two projects would not be forced to shut down. They would, or would they? I mean, but to explain.
They came back with their renewal. How old are those projects? How close are you?
So both of them are about 8 years out.
Would they be required to mitigate the same way agriculture does as far as runoff and pesticides and fertilizers into the lake?
Yes.
Is that part of their approval?
The State Water Resources Quality Control Board has what's called the Cannabis General Order that requires stormwater runoff to be maintained on site. So that is mitigated.
Okay.
Rebecca Harper. I don't know, based on the definition that Holly provided from the State Lands Commission, I guess I'm not sure what additional discussion is needed to determine whether Clear Lake is public lands or not. I mean, if this definition is current, it would seem that Clear Lake is public lands, or fall into that category, or if I'm missing something.
Is there a state setback from public lands, or is it a county setback only?
That's kind of one.
There, okay, so the county's current ordinance, when listing public lands, does not speak to the lake. So I don't know that they were saying everything according to the state's definition of public lands would be included in this. Additional clarity, if the lake were to be included, would be very helpful.
So the state, this is Michelle speaking through my text message, this Mary Claiborne. State Lands Commission does not oversee Clear Lake, but they do oversee Blue Lakes.
So if you want Clear Lake added, it would be necessary to have a recommendation from the task force to do so.
I noticed we had 3 hands coming from Zoom.
Should we go back to public input? Let's do that. Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, Maria. For the 1,000-foot setback around the lake, I guess my input would be that with all the discussions going around about trying to get the lake healthy again, and Hitch trying to get navigable waters for Hitch and helping the Hitch survive, I think this is a good opportunity for us to do something positive and make a 1,000-foot setback. Is there, like I said before, are we running out of space? Is there a reason we need to be within that 1,000-foot setback? I just think for the way that all the discussions are going with the county to get the lake healthy, what residents want, reduce algae, Hitch habitat, I think the 1,000-foot setback around the lake is good. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Go ahead, Holly.
Oh, hi. I want to point out that when we're talking about C, it's talking about locations as places of recreation and recreational activities. Clear Lake is certainly one of the biggest, recreational activities here. I also wanted to point out that the two projects that you pointed out, one of which is Aquaba, which is up on North Drive. First of all, I believe that was at 1,200 foot setback from the lake. And it's also at the very top of the ridge line. The other project, which you were referring to at Sulphur Bank, is the Lamperti project, which is the one that I just mentioned, in which Trey Sherrill said he spoke with County Council and they agreed that it was public lands, and so he redrew the project so that it was set back 1,000 feet. Thank you.
The next is Betsy.
Thank you. Go ahead, Betsy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the previous speaker was talking about the State Lands Commission and said that it doesn't have any authority over Clear Lake, only Blue Lakes. I really know that that's not true. If you look on the county website for the Department of Water, about Clear Lake, you'll see the Commission decision, and it specifically regulates the lake bed, which includes the foreshore and the near shore, not the water itself, but the bed, the shoreline itself. That's where the setback would be, and it would be in compliance with that State Lands Commission requirement. It has nothing to do with Blue Lakes. Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. Anybody else? Go ahead. State your name for the record, please. Yep. Yeah.
Andrew Dobbs Kramer. Just a general comment, less so specifically on the Clear Lake thing, but I think the Clear Lake thing it illustrates the point. I think just as there is a subsection J in here describing how exactly the setback is measured, I think there should be a subsection K that clarifies that if setbacks are changed after the initial approval of a project, that the project is subject to the setbacks as originally or as enacted at the time of project approval. So that if these setbacks are subsequently changed, somebody who got approved and built a whole farm, to the code as it was written is not 10 years later told they have to pick it all up and move it 600 feet one direction or another. I think I appreciate that it's in the legal non-conforming, but I think having a direct note here is worthwhile given just how important this might be to people.
Thank you. Any further public input?
Yes, I would like to say if the lake is considered public lands or not, the idea is to protect the lands, and if cannabis is going to generate volatile organic compounds that would float, they're going to float into the lake also, which is not good for the lake. For just the health and the reason of the lake, the 1,000-foot setback should be there to keep undesirable chemicals and oils out of the lake.
Angela has her hand raised.
Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, Maria. Just to go to Mr. Kramer's comment, from what Holly said, the one on Sulphur Bank and the one on North Drive, it sounds like in their conditions of approval, they are supposed to be beyond the 1,000-foot setback. So if, I believe that's Mary sitting next to you that said that there are the two projects within the 1,000-foot setback. So I guess my question would be, are they not conforming to their conditions, or are they outside of the 1,000-foot setback? And if we created a 1,000-foot setback, it wouldn't affect anybody. Thank you.
So apologies, I misspoke. What I meant to say was they appear within close proximity to that 1,000-foot setback. It seems that Holly has clarified from a 2022 Planning Commission that the project consultant modified a project prior to approval with the Planning Commission.
Okay, so if this was created 1,000-foot setback around the lake, it would not affect. There's no current projects that it would affect, correct?
If that is in fact the none that are currently approved.
Okay, just want
the
to clarify.
that I can think of that are in closest proximity within that 1,000-foot setback range.
Okay, thank you.
Bringing it back to the task force for discussion and action.
Just like for final clarity on the who oversees Clear Lake as public lands. Lake County was granted sovereign submerged lands in trust in 1973 for the protection of wildlife habitats, the improvement, protection, and conservation of the wildlife and fish resources and the ecology of the area, by the Public Lands Commission in 1973. So, not that long ago. The jury is back.
So it's county.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm just gonna say, whichever way we go on it, including Clear Lake or not including Clear Lake, it sounds like it does need to be addressed in here. Because if the board has defined public lands one way, and then planning commission and county council are seeing it a different way, you know, that's not fair to a person who's trying to prepare a project. If they have one set of rules here, and then they're being told something else here.
And is the task force only concerned with Clear Lake or Blue Lakes and Lake Pillsbury and any others? Like what body of water is at the threshold of interest? We've got Dietrich Reservoir down in Middletown, the Borax Lake, Thurston Lake, got a bunch of lakes. Which ones are included? Just Clear Lake?
That's the rivers. That's part of that.
Yeah, but we didn't want to discuss navigable water. What's the feel for the task force? I'm not quite getting consensus on adding Clear Lake or any other lake. So that's why I'm kind of staring at you guys. I think this either needs further discussion or we're going to leave it alone.
This seems outside of the scope of, in terms of public lands and defining that outside of the scope of this task force. Above our pay grade too.
I mean, I kind of think that with the way that things are trending and knowing that there aren't any approved projects within that 1,000 feet, it would make more sense to include Clear Lake and public lands now than later on when there are approved projects within 1,000 feet of Clear Lake. If that's what's going to eventually occur, I'm not sure.
This is Will. It did not sound like there was any lack of consensus among the members of the public that we've heard from today. It sounds like to me that members of the public would like to see Clear Lake included in public lands by the definition we're discussing.
When I was mentioning consensus, I was limiting it to the task force.
Fair enough.
Okay, by show of hands.
Mary, are there projects in the pipeline that you can think of that would be affected by this?
Well, I don't have a close look on all of the commercial cannabis cultivation projects, just the ones that are assigned to me. And with that, the ones that are assigned to me are not within 1,000-foot setback of the lake.
I'd like to add it, and I totally agree with Carl on the point about agriculture though, and that's not what we're talking about, but I would like to see, cannabis and all agriculture be pushed back, at least from that part of the 1,000 feet. But since we're only talking about cannabis, that's all we can do right now.
And are we only talking about Clear Lake?
I don't, do we know? There's nothing else, no other sites around the other lake / pond / whatever I'm classifying them as?
I would not expect Mary to be able to produce that.
That's kind of my
answer right
point.
away.
That was actually my point.
And there may be projects up in that area around Lake Pillsbury, but there may not be a Lake Pillsbury, too much longer to the dance hall in there, so.
Well, that should keep the discussion pretty narrow, right? We're not gonna have to open it up.
Yeah.
Was that a motion, Richmond?
He's a motion-making machine.
Yeah.
So motion to add Clear Lake to specific, the listing of public lands.
Yes, and only Clear Lake at this point.
There's a motion on the floor. How long before it dies for lack of second?
Scary.
Catherine wants a second.
I'm not here in a second, so if we don't have a second, then we'll move on.
I'll second it.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of a 1,000 foot setback to apply to 7.79 or full lake level of Clear Lake?
Is the motion to, I thought the motion was just to include Clear Lake as public lands in the already
I
existing.
need clarity for the planners. So Clear Lake at its full is 7.79 Rumsey. Otherwise, don't give our planners, oh, it's a drought year.
No, that's
Clear Lake's
not-
way down over yonder.
No.
So 7.79 would be a clear reference point that we could use as the beginning spot for measuring distance.
But the
Because that
motion is
line
to
is no-
include Clear Lake at that stage as part of subsection C, public land.
Correct. Sorry, I think I just changed your motion, huh?
Is that how the state the state defines high water mark, right?
Well, when you think about it, 0 Rumsey to 7.79 is known as public access lands anyway.
Right.
So to not include those would make it weird.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a motion and a second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Who's opposed?
Nay.
We got 1 nay. All right. Motion
I'm
passes
gonna abstain.
4 to
You said aye though.
I
to
did not say aye.
2. All right.
That was me.
Wait, no. 4 to 1 nay. Jennifer Nara abstains. All right, got it. Is there any other item that the task force would like to see change from A to J? And also, if there are any permits that are currently within the 1,000 foot setback from Clear Lake high water mark, there was a suggestion from the public regarding adding a subsection K, which would direct staff on how to deal with those who had been permitted prior to the regulation update on setbacks, specific to the items in A through J. So just throwing that out as what we have left to discuss until we're done with this section.
I think that's an important thing to address. Is this the place to address it, or do we point them to the county's existing non-conforming language, or what's the?
This additional language, I could see the value in it as giving guidance when we do get our 10-year permit times up for renewal. And so, yeah, direction on the feel for that, whether we would force these to maybe scooch all their stuff over, or allow them to kind of be grandfathered in, sort of.
This is Will. I personally feel that if we set a rule today, the spirit of that suggestion around an item K is valid, right? And if we didn't like the rule, why would we set the rule as it is, and why wouldn't we tolerate an adjustment, down the road to that rule, but that would allow projects built to meet that standard to persist. So, I personally am in favor of an item K of the sort that was floated earlier.
To allow for the extension or to require a new application?
No,
No,
so that
to-
they, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's so that when the project's approved, at any point in time, when it's approved, whatever setbacks apply, if those setbacks change in the future, then they still follow what they were approved for at that time.
Correct.
Yeah. Which I think is good to have that language in there.
Do we have any public input on that portion? Go ahead. Andrew?
I just wanted to add, I think one item that came up at a previous meeting was also the case of a childcare facility might locate, or some other facility might move into a setback after a farm is already there. So I think this goes beyond just the public land. I think this is really for all of these setbacks where, an applicant's done their due diligence, built to the code, and then forces outside of their control to change the setbacks.
Any further public input on adding subsection K? Bringing it back to the task force. Discussion and action.
Richmond, I fully agree, they should be protected. What they did was right at the time, that equity and a huge outlay to find that should all be protected, each company. I think Will is ready to,
So moved. Do you need me to be clear?
Motion to add subsection K that states that the setbacks are changed. The permits approved prior to changing the setbacks is held to the regulations in place at the time of the first permit approval. Capture it? Get it ready? Okay.
Specifically with regard to setbacks.
Yep.
Yeah.
Specifically with regards to setbacks and outdoor cultivation and these three, this list of
Yeah.
exclusion areas only. Yeah.
Okay. So moved.
Okay.
second. Go ahead.
Good. We have a first motion and a second. All those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on. Let's see. I think we're done with exclusion areas unless there's anybody or any suggestions to add exclusion areas.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are the community growth boundaries going to change?
They very well could, yes. Through Lake County 2050 process.
Right.
Which is when that motion K would probably kick in.
Are they going to expand significantly or?
Unknown at this time. The next couple of weeks, we'll be doing in-person meetings with the LAPACs and their planning areas to discuss that exact question. So I'll have a much better idea by Thanksgiving. I did not hear anybody really raring to go to totally, enlarge community growth boundaries, but there could be some tweaks here and there is what I'm anticipating.
So basically that would affect only forward moving projects, not existing projects, right?
Not if we got subsection K in there. If we had existing projects that changed or that were within the 1,000 feet, or, okay, let me think about that.
The opposite, right?
Correct.
I don't think they would be protected,
Wait, but
except for legal non-conforming.
if this goes to the board, and say the board they're like, oh, we love this new ordinance, okay, we accept it, so section K is adopted in there.
But section K is talking about if the setbacks change, not if the community growth boundary.
But it's a setback to the community growth boundary.
Right, so they would be covered then by section K because the community growth boundary changed,
Yeah.
similar to a daycare coming in.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Apply to anything A
Yes.
through I.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because as long as they were in compliance at the time their project was approved.
They'd be protected.
Okay, yes.
All right, are we all agree on that?
That's how I
Yes.
see it, I don't know.
That was K, right?
Yes, that would be K, and it would apply.
Grandfathering, okay.
Okay. So is there anything we wanted to add? We'll take some public input on that question as well in a minute.
Did we want to add those other public uses as were suggested at our last meeting? Although it doesn't matter because it doesn't change the substance.
both subsection.
Both uses, you mean the activities one could do on a lake?
Right.
That doesn't change
It doesn't change
it doesn't
anything.
change public lands.
That already says including but not limited to.
Yeah. No, I'm asking if you want to add a subsection for a whole new thingy that'll have 1,000-foot setback. Thingy, that's an industrial term. Yeah. All right, let's see what the public has to say on that one then. Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, Maria. I think you know what my question is going to be. For years, I've been told that this is the portion I needed to wait for. Any options for our area to be able to put into an exclusion zone that is reflected on the exclusion zone map on the GIS?
Say that again, please.
Okay, as you know, we were asking for years to be placed into the exclusion zone because our CCRs do not allow it. And I was told during this revision, the Cannabis Task Force, that it would be brought up during the exclusion zone area portion. So that's what we're at. I'm trying to figure out, is there something that can be added, or the exclusion zone map, the GIS map does not reflect our area at all. We're not in a community growth boundary, but I'm wondering if you have any input as to something that we can do to add it so that we don't run into the problems that we did, where people waste a lot of money trying to get a permit only to have them denied.
So then the request would be to add a subsection specific to the Double Eagle subdivision.
Correct, if we may.
I mean, it's in the CCNR, so we need to add.
The county does not, we don't oversee CCNRs.
Right.
So what has happened is they have large enough parcels that they qualify for both zoning district and size to be able to apply for a cultivation permit. So then historically, we've had one or two of them do that, but their CCNRs say no, but the county doesn't stop processing because a private document governing an HOA says no. So that's where we end up into this large.
Sounds like it should.
So I'll give Jennifer a little bit of history. What happened was we did have 4 applications out here. One actually did get early activation, but what happens is the GIS map on the county's website that has exclusion zones does not show the Double Eagle Ranch as being an exclusion zone, because it's not listed as one. So a lot of people started buying the parcels out here with the intention of getting permits, only to be very upset when they found out that they were unable to, and now they had a parcel that they could not do what they wanted with.
Because they didn't read the CCNRs that are given to them in escrow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That seems like a you problem, not a me problem.
So, but a lot of people go onto the county GIS map, and even though it says this is not an official document, they do use that, and that's why we were requesting, even if it's just a different color on the map, so that people that flags them to do more research. We're just trying to prevent this from happening more. Thank you.
Are there any other CCNR are there any other homeowner associations that would face this?
Most are within a community growth boundary.
Twin Lakes might be, because they have larger parcels as well as smaller parcels.
Rimrock Estates.
Those are pretty big.
Those are our neighbors.
Out where Margot lives,
Donovan Valley.
Yeah, Donovan Valley, thank you. There aren't a lot of, but they don't have an HOA out there though. Twin Lakes, do they? I don't remember if they do or not. Typically HOAs, subdivisions with HOAs are residentially zoned.
Even these large parcels?
There was one issue in the Riviera to one of the large parcels up at the top. Where the realtor was.
Oh yeah, I know that parcel.
Yeah.
So I guess okay, so having shopped for property before, I know better than to do that. But, and then do we talk about communities that just have a road improvement fee within their, like they don't have full-blown CCNRs, but they have a road maintenance fee or something? And the only reason I'm saying that is because then it leads to, well, we do have CCNRs. We do have an HOA.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Okay, maybe we don't have that here.
We do have a number of subdivisions that are rejected from the county maintained road system, and they have to develop their own road maintenance fees for their folks, property owners.
I mean, I would just say, I don't know. I think the buyer should beware and read all the documents when they go in escrow on a piece of property.
And if the county did have a checklist with requirements, your requirements to apply for cannabis, check your, any HOA or CCNR restrictions. And that's on the applicant.
Because they technically trump the county, right?
So how did one of them get approved?
County trumps.
It was EA.
It's different. It's private stuff versus county regulations. So it's like apples and oranges, pretty much.
Pre Prop 64 is my guess in there, and then they called an early activation, which was illegal. And so they may have just continued to grow because there was a lot of misinformation around that. But we got rid of early activation. That's like one of the first things we did.
So what we would be looking at, it would be, the request is to add an actual neighborhood or community into this exclusion zone. That would be a first. It wouldn't be a spot zone because we're not changing the zoning designation. We would be adding them to an exclusion zone. Or to an exclusion area. We'd be adding them to that list. Go ahead, Andrew.
Are we going to add all subdivisions where this might be an issue?
That is an implied question, yes, that I was kind of not asking yet, but it's a valid question.
Because I would be concerned that we just run into the same issue with a different subdivision. If we add one to the list and don't add the others, then it seems as though that's a comprehensive list.
And what would be the process established then for adding subdivisions if we were going to start doing that too?
Seems like a lot.
Go ahead, Bill, we're in public
I
input.
have a question. If K is basically a grandfathered in phrase, so that they are there, would somebody that within that 1,000 feet wanted to put in a school or a grade school or childcare, would they not be permitted to?
They would be permitted to, but it would not negate the ability for the cannabis facility to continue, for the cannabis business to continue.
Okay.
This is Bill Weiss coming out of public comment, but if this was an adjustment we were to make, would the board of supervisors likely approve that as language within this particular section?
The supervisors would likely have the same questions that are going around the table right now. But they surprise me all the time, so don't look at me as a good predictor of what comes up.
I mean, as part of the application process, could there be something on there that's like, is your project within an HOA or whatever you want to call it? Yes or no? And if it's like a yes, do they have written approval from that association for their operation?
We could add that as just a policy within the department we could add it to the checklist that we have for our pre-apps, which are a required first step before they submit their applications. And just so that we could inform them, you're going to have the whole community out here telling you can't do it anyway because it violates your CCNRs.
Right.
So they may take action that they're authorized to take as an HOA.
Yeah, that was
And we would also let them know, like we did before, that we may not see any inconsistencies with the general plan or the area plan, but you're going to run into a problem here with the CCNRs. And we will make note of it in our staff report.
And at that point, you may already, again, that's a buyer beware thing, because my guess is at that point, if they're already filling out their pre-application checklist, then they've signed the lease or bought a parcel.
Right, but if they need to provide like some type of written document that the HOA has given it its blessing,
Yeah.
if they don't have that, then, you know.
We can do just so you're aware of something, we can't create a condition unless we have a nexus. So that's a clear connection to a regulation. But we cannot just make things up. And by making things up, it means we can't just demand something or prohibit something based on something that's not in our code, or in the area plan, or in the general plan.
So that couldn't be a requirement, it would just be more of like a warning to them, like.
Angela's recommendation of getting on this exclusion zone was the best way we could think of to actually accomplish that. Because that would then create the nexus. It would be listed in the exclusion zone list.
So how would we do that? Would we identify just that particular subdivision?
You would say within the boundaries of the legal subdivision.
And then our other our HOAs or subdivisions would be like, well, we want to be in on that list too.
They very well could.
Okay.
A lot of them, it's a moot point because they just don't have the larger size parcels.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have HOAs.
Okay.
But there's no saying that a community like Twin Lakes or some neighborhood or an individual parcel owner wouldn't come forward and say, I want to be on this list too.
Mm-hmm.
Just a time check.
Oh
wait, we're on long time. We're on long meeting time, huh? Okay, so we're meeting from 1 to 4. And it is actually, that's wrong. It's actually 2:40. We're doing good.
Like double wrong.
Yeah. We really just need to take that down, change the battery.
Looks like Angela's hand is up again.
Angela, is your hand still up or did you just not take it down?
No, I raised it again. Thank you. I wanted to offer a little bit more information, just to give you guys a little bit more background. So the findings from the first denial for Double Eagle Ranch, and I can read what the Planning Commission found, was that the declaration of the CC&Rs intends to protect the morals, comfort, and general welfare of the person residing within this community, and it was an agreement among the residents and their POA. Although the county may not enforce the CC&Rs do represent the prevailing view of what constitutes the comfort and general welfare of their neighborhood. Therefore, the proposed project does not meet these findings and violates the existing CC&Rs that encompass the statement of this finding. Therefore, the mitigated negative declaration is denied and the major use permit is denied. So just to give a little background of how the Planning Commission ended up coming to their findings. And I don't know if that muddied the waters some more, but yes, like Maria said, this was the only way that we could figure out how to not run into this in the future. We've been an incorporated POA since 1971, and I don't want to keep doing this. Thank you.
Angela.
I support adding it to guidelines and checklists and things like that, but I think we stumble into some unanswerable questions doing this for one community and not any other, unless we got some very, very solid language checked by county council. But again, it's
Maria, just one last thing. Would the task force be amenable to maybe creating exclusion zones or zones that need further review and making a different color on the GIS map for those and putting us in that? We'd be amenable to that.
I think instead of a color layer on the GIS system, it would, a disclaimer warning might be more appropriate on the application, saying, please acknowledge, or, please be aware.
Yeah.
There are communities with prohibitions of cannabis-related businesses in their CC&Rs. That would be part of
within the
handling it
GIS,
within
so
the
that
department.
it would happen earlier, or was talking about again at the application.
Right.
Point of application, because the point of application, I think, we're later than the concern that Angela has.
Because it helps that Double Legal actually has it in their recorded document that regulates their community. Because then we could issue the warning, but I don't know how I don't know that a layer just to caution people would, I'm not sure how we would do that.
Seems like it needs to happen on the other end to me. Kind of like you're an Airbnb that doesn't allow kids. Kind of put that up front and then you don't get kids there. I don't understand this.
Yes, for the realtors and
yeah, I just
whatever for that.
I'm just thinking how other properties have done this. They just moved that statement up on the very front of their, yeah, so you know it right up front. There's never a question about it. It's like it's an issue.
Angela, with the discussion that you've heard, do you think it would satisfy your needs if we did start posting some sort of warning directing property or prospective applicants to check those CC&Rs to avoid conflict at the hearings?
It would be very helpful. We've actually, even on our website, have posted on our front page, on our homepage, we have an important notice to realtors and prospective buyers. We reach out to realtors when properties come up for sale out here to let them know ahead of time. When something goes through the title company, we make sure that the buyer knows now. Anything that you guys can offer us as assistance, because it's a constant battle. We're still seeing people turning some of these properties over where they sell them, and someone comes in and thinks that they can get, based looking at the GIS map, that they can do a commercial cannabis grow out here. We've had 4 applications. And I think the last one, he finally withdrew it. It was just about a year and a half ago. So yeah, we're still seeing turnover. Any help that you guys can offer is appreciated.
I'm not seeing a strong consensus to add a subdivision to the exclusion zone list, but instead, what we can start doing now is I'll direct staff to make sure that we add that to our pre-application list. So before anybody spends money on an app or an application submission, they'll know. They'll get a warning from us that it has happened in the past that the Planning Commission has denied a project based on this. And so, just so they know before they give us all their money, which we're not going to give them back, that is particularly risky.
Okay, great. And did you say that there could be a possibility of making a needs further review color on the GIS map?
Without having a nexus to the code, I'm not sure that would work.
Okay.
But our staff will be well informed so that when people give us calls about certain parcels, which we get a lot.
Right, the problem is they buy the parcel before they go in for the application.
Yeah, see, that's the thing that we can't really stop them.
Right.
I don't know that needs further review would actually help them enough to not buy that parcel either. But wherever we have interface with the public, we'll start just keeping that warning in our minds should it be appropriate.
Okay, and just to note, if you want to, it's not just commercial cannabis; it's all commercial activity for out here. So if anybody tries to go in for a permit for any commercial activity, we're not singling out cannabis. It's just
also let's also update our APN pages to have a note there too. So when we get inquiries, when environmental health gets a septic permit, or a well permit, they check with us to make sure it's a legal lot. And so we look at those APN pages to determine legal lot status before any development ever happens. So they may have already bought the parcel, but that would be the earliest moment that we could then also, when we respond to EH that it's a legal lot, just let them know ahead of time, this subdivision does not allow commercial activity.
Right. Yeah. No campgrounds. No. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
However, I don't know how y'all feel about home occupations, but let's talk about that offline.
Yeah, we didn't have a problem with those. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Mary will reach out to you to get specific wording figured out that we will put on every APN page and let every planner know.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm not hearing anything further for adding or changing. I would like to recommend we take a 5-minute break.
Yes, thank you.
We need to stand up and wait. I think we're at Lake County Important Farmland, but let's do a quick check. Ruby, did you have any questions on what we just covered? Anything that you need clarity on? Okay. So let's go on to Lake County Important Farmland. This came about from a series of ordinances. I think it's 3101 and 3103. Establishing a kind of an overlay zone for prime soils. Was it, Rebecca, was it prime ag soils in cultivation? Or how did they establish
Farmland of local importance, statewide importance, and other lands designated by the Board of Supervisors. And it is a layer on the exclusion zones, commercial cannabis cultivation exclusion zone, GIS.
It's in the exclusion zone?
It is,
okay.
because
even though it's not really an exclusion zone.
It's more of a limitation zone or a restricted use zone to mixed light or indoor.
And so I know that when I first started attending these meetings, we were talking about the process that permittees had to go through that are within FPZ, and that was conversion from outdoor into mixed light with greenhouses by a certain date. And the question then was, well, what am I as planning director going to do regarding when that date passes for revocations? And it just hasn't been one of the top priorities as far as revocations. We've been focusing on people who have been blatantly disregarding the code rather than this particular much smaller group of folks. But I can't avoid it forever. So I can't just disregard the code either. So it will be helpful to have recommendations from the task force to go to the board regarding how we think this is going and what we, if we want any amendments to it.
I remember some of the conversation is it was around, it's because it's around the protection of future or potential agriculture in those zones. There was always some confusion about why would we then require a cannabis grower to pave over what could be permeable soil. And how does that actually support the protection of that farmland? I think was one of the.
It is a good question. When you build foundations or do development on prime ag soils, you'll typically lose that prime ag soil square footage forever.
I think part of it too, just being in on the initial discussions that took place with one of our current board members, as well as my predecessor, as well as Rebecca's predecessor, in deciding which areas were designated and then drawing those lines. So a lot of the discussion was also to protect both cannabis and traditional ag from any overspray crop contamination. That was the idea.
Okay.
So that cannabis could exist in those areas, but in an enclosed space to protect it, vice versa.
Okay.
So that was also part of the discussion. Because at that time, there was a lot of lawsuits going in other counties between cannabis cultivators and traditional ag producers.
Because of the sprays of pesticides or treatments in traditional ag not being able to be accommodated by the cannabis industry because of the cannabis regulation.
Exactly, because it was a failed crop. Yeah.
Okay. So in the ordinance, then it talks about the, it does have 1,000-foot setback from the farmland protection zone. It does also add in vegetation screening as an attempt for sheltering and minimizing that spray spread, catching it. What are the thoughts of the task force? Did you have any questions on this particular section of the code, or would you like to open it up to public input? Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to add? I just see that you're up on the screen.
No, not for this one.
I'd like to add a couple of things. There is a clause in the condition of approval for projects that if they are not used within 2 years or have 2-year period of inactivity, they do expire. To date, there are, 18 projects that are approved within FPZ. 6 of those were required to convert. One of those projects was revoked. So there's 5 that are left that have not yet converted from outdoor to mixed light cultivation.
So 18 approved, you said 5 have not converted.
That's correct.
And 1 was revoked?
That's correct.
And so that means?
The other ones were designed with mixed light.
Okay.
So, do we know the staff? This is really hard. I think it's bad policy when we're protecting bad behavior. And that's how I feel this policy is. Because traditional pesticides find their way onto organically grown cannabis. We're therefore telling the cannabis they have to stay away, but in general, we should be asking for better management practices from everybody.
That's true, but there's some things you can't avoid. Like you cannot, if there's an inversion or all of a sudden wind picks up, I mean, farmers will shut down. They do the best that they can, but there are other things that occur that, could cause offsite movement.
Agreed.
Maybe we do need pie.
Maria, I recall at our last meeting, you mentioning something about wanting to get ag advisory input on this item. Is that still the case? Or has there been any attempt to schedule an ag advisory committee meeting?
The recommendations, when we get our draft ordinance, will go before the Ag Advisory Committee. But I haven't thought about scheduling meetings with them for just, like one-offs. But yeah, it would definitely be up their alley for input.
Just curious.
However, if the task force is interested in getting their input prior to making a recommendation, then I would work with Catherine to schedule a meeting, but we're still in harvest season right now, so it wouldn't be for a little while. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. My preference is that the task force would move forward so that I don't have this secondary list and an alternate path and timeline. We do have a hand raised in Zoom if we want to open this up to public.
Yeah, let's do that.
Great. Anybody in the room? Mr. Wilson, go ahead. And Sarah, we'll get to you in just a minute, or we'll get to Zoom room in just a minute.
Bill Wilson. The problem with the grapes right now that we're having is with the cannabis and the terpenes. What happens is the wineries are now looking at that, and when the grapes get tainted by terpenes, just like the smoke, the buyers don't buy the grapes. The buyers in Napa and Sonoma County that buy Lake County grapes now are starting to pay attention to who is close to a cannabis grove, and they are opting not to buy their grapes. So that has taken a big market chunk, going to take a good market chunk out of the grape growers, just because of the contamination from the terpenes. And that's happening right now. They are starting check to see who is close and who's not close. And it happened again, like with the smoke tank from all of our fires, and how many people lost big money because the buyers wouldn't buy the grapes.
So there's a study. Where are we?
This is kind of loosey-goosey right now.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not doing very good classroom management. We're in public input. If you want to hold that comment, let's finish up public input. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi there, this is Sarah Bodner, consultant. I think this policy is one of the most outdated on the books in Lake County. And I think it's, a result of trying to set policy before we really understood the nature of cannabis farming and how it was going to impact existing agriculture. And I really understand the initial intention behind it, but I think what we have seen play out in Lake County and in other parts of California really challenges the validity of this specific policy. Beginning with the fact that this perceived terpene drift has been disproven. It's been disproven in Santa Barbara County through lawsuits. It's been disproven in Sonoma County through rigorous academic studies. And I think it's really more of a fear factor than an actual risk at this point. Additionally, the idea of the policy was to protect these soils. Yet what it does is forces people to grow in greenhouses on these highly valuable farmlands, which requires pouring slabs. And I think it's just completely nonsensical that we're trying to, quote, protect farmland by pouring cement slabs. And that I don't see how we can argue that that has less of an impact than putting plants in the ground or plants in pots. And so, I think that we have an opportunity here to question, is the end that we have achieved really the goal of this policy, or are there other ways that we can address the concerns around this policy, given science, given lived experience of these various industries, so that it can be a win-win for everyone? I'd love to see this sunset and have new regulations that address valid agricultural concerns about co-locations emerge from this that represent really what we know to be true about growing cannabis, and that we have seen it successfully grown adjacent to grapes in Sonoma County with very little separation. This terpene drift is not actually real. And I know that a lot of agricultural industries are struggling right now, but I'd love us to focus on real solutions and sunset something that was designed with good intentions, but isn't really serving the county, I think, overall, not the economic interests of the county, and not really the interests of the soil either. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lucchetti, you're next. Go ahead. Wait, that was Margot. Somehow she got to the top, but Peter was first. All right, Margot, we'll be right with you.
Okay.
Can you, I just want to make sure you can hear me because I can't figure this system out. I apologize, but can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, good. All right. So I have the opposite view of what was just articulated, and I'll give you an example. I'm running an organic beef cattle operation, and I can't put a new railroad tie in my corral. That's against the organic policy. I can't put a new pressure-treated post in the ground on my property. And if the cannabis facility that's adjacent to me is using pesticides or anything else, any other chemical, in less than 1,000 feet from me, when my buyers come out and look at my property, which they do, Whole Foods wants to come and look at where the cattle are being grown, they say, I don't want to see that or any of those activities next to your property. So it affects my ability to perform from a commercial perspective. I think that the cannabis industry, as it is on some level shown some measure of favoritism on this issue relative to other agricultural applications that are currently in play in Lake County. And I think this policy is selective. It doesn't apply to me. today because I'm not in the exclusion zone. But I think the policy as it is now applied selectively is wrong. That's prejudiced and biased towards me as a cattle producer over somebody else who's a grape producer. And it's really interesting when you get into it because the whole idea is grape producers are using chemicals that might affect cannabis, or cannabis is using chemicals that might affect grape producers. In my case, I'm just organic and I've got to honor that. And I want to tell you one other thing and I'll, conclude. I want everybody to know grape growers are having a tough time. Cannabis growers are having a tough time, but I want y'all to know I'm making money in the organic cattle business. For the first time in the last 5 or 6 years, we're actually doing okay after being on our ranch producing cattle, never missing 1 year. I want you to think about it. Since 1970, 54 years, we've never failed to produce a crop, ever. We've done it every year, good or bad, rain or shine, profit or not. We've done it. And I'm very proud of what we're doing. I think the organic story that we have is really positive, and I want to be treated fairly. And I don't feel the selectivity of the policy as it exists is fair. And I think we should really be respectful towards people who are honoring our organic approach. And I think that we should go out of our way to do that and really protect Lake County's agriculture heritage as we know it. That's what I'm asking for. Thank you.
Mr. Lucchetti, just so I have clarity, are you talking about more of a dichotomy between organic and non-organic agricultural practices, or are you specific to cannabis? Because I'm not sure what other agricultural permits you were referring to as being treated differently. Could you expand on that just a little bit, please? Well, it's the exclusion zone that we're talking about is very selective. Would you agree with that? I'm not in it, so it's up near the lake, and the exclusion zone is very selective. It's preferential to some mostly grape growers, I think, that are in this preference that are beneficiaries of the ordinance. I'm not a beneficiary of the ordinance. Is that clear enough? Am I making it clear?
I think I understand better. Thank you.
See, I really don't think I'm being treated fairly. I'm not doing anything wrong. I've been doing this for 54 years. I'm growing organic, but I'm not a beneficiary of this policy. Okay. You could put chemical intensive or cannabis 1 foot from my fence line under the current ordinance, which I think is wrong.
So you're saying then the farmland protection zone is a policy that does not protect all organic farming? It does not. Okay. Absolutely not. It's preferential. And what I'm saying is it shouldn't be prejudicial. It should just be applied to all prime farmland, particularly organic prime farmland. And that's what I'm asking for. And I apologize, this request may be a little bit far afield from the specific editing of this ordinance, but I wanted to get the point on the table. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Go ahead, Margot.
Oh, thank you. A moment ago, there was the suggestion that we should be looking for a win-win for growers and for the community. And I agree. And as an ag county, we should protect agricultural lands and keep most of those lands productive for food because we are a food insecure county. So what does that win-win look like? Well, if we promote indoor grows for cannabis, that means there's less water usage, less pesticide use, more ability to control pesticide drift, and it means a higher price for the cannabis crop because indoor grows command a higher price than outdoor grows. So I put that on the table for discussion and consideration. Thank you.
Do we have any further hands up? I don't see any in the Zoom room. We'll bring it back. Go ahead, Andrew.
I'd like to just call back to a question that was asked a little earlier in this meeting when we were discussing the setbacks, which is, do we have any evidence that 1,000 feet makes a difference when it comes to spray drift, or is that just an arbitrary number? I would also ask a few other questions. Is it consistent with the general plan to require paving prime ag soils, or is that in contravention of the ag element in the general plan? I would also ask, when we want to encourage cultivating in ground in prime soils, we have incredible soils here in Lake County. We're looking to build a brand for Lake County cannabis, increase the value of Lake County cannabis, push maybe our appellations here. The way to do that would be to cultivate in ground and to talk about the terroir of this wonderful farming community rather than to push people in brown farmlands to cultivate in imported soil in bags on a concrete floor. And finally, I would ask, is there any separation required if a traditional, conventional vineyard wants to go in next to an organic vineyard, or are they allowed to plant right up to the fence line?
Thank you. Is there any further public input? I see a hand raised. Angela, go ahead.
Thank you, Maria. I don't know how many of the task force members have completed the general plan and local area plan surveys, but one of the questions on there, or a couple of them, talk about food insecurity and food deserts and what we need to do as a county to increase our food production in the county. I think changing the farmland protection zone that's currently there is going against what is trying to be accomplished through the general plan and local area plans and increasing food production within the county. So just something to think about if people haven't been participating in the general plan and local area plans. That is a discussion that's going on.
Thanks. Any further hands up? Nothing in Zoom. Bringing it back to the task force.
So I'd like to address some comments. I'm just going to state that cannabis is tested to the parts per billion for pesticide residue, and traditional ag is only tested to the parts per million. So the accusation that cannabis sprays would affect any other crop or livestock is just not true. Not, I think that all agriculture should be considered all agriculture, and there shouldn't be infighting between livestock and crops and cannabis. Agriculture is under attack, and we should be aligning ourselves and not fighting with one another. So to see the attacks from other crops is always disheartening to me. We have to be organic, but because we are not federally regulated, we can't use the term organic. There are certifications in California called OCal and I don't remember the other one, that offer certification that is equal to the organic standards. And so I think we just need to find a way to coexist and quit casting dispersions from crop to crop and understand that everybody wants to protect their own crops. Back to the terpene taint, there's a study that I just pulled up that we have sent several times. And it is, cannabis would have to be in full flower for over 400 days to have any taint on any other natural product. So an example is cannabis is really only in full flower for about 45 to 60 days. So the possibility of tainting wine grapes is a falsehood that has been used by the wine industry to not honor contracts. The wine industry is in the tank. 50% of Sonoma grapes were harvested this year. And we all know that agricultural contracts are really tough to enforce. So let's talk about facts and not anecdotal until somebody proves otherwise. That's all.
Task force. Anyone else?
Yeah, a question. Is it necessary to pave under a hoop house?
No, hoop houses aren't usually paved, are they?
Hoop houses were originally not part of, and I think they're still not a part of that. And so we can't use hoop houses. It has to be greenhouses.
The idea being it would be a structure that could seal everything in.
Right.
And nothing gets out without filtration.
Under the motions for consideration, I don't see, I see it to move, to amend, or to maintain. I don't see to remove as one of our options.
That doesn't mean it's not an option.
Okay.
It just isn't on the list.
All right.
I think also, just for additional context, that is maybe something Catherine was alluding to in her context that she provided. I think a big part of this ordinance was trying to protect prime farmland from people who weren't as committed to agriculture as some of the longstanding traditional agricultural stakeholders. I think that was part of kind of when this ordinance was put in place, was, you know, we want to protect the property values from getting too high. We want to protect the lands. If people decide this isn't an industry they want to be a part of, or if the industry doesn't succeed in the way that it was predicted to. So just as additional context.
So you think that would have happened with any ground crop then?
I mean, I think what you have is maybe some folks who hadn't been involved in agriculture before and might, not my perception, but what the perception was when creating the ordinance, might not have been familiar with, you know, the market flexibilities and some of the other issues that agricultural producers face. And so there was some hesitancy around whether cannabis would be here in the long run.
So they thought there'd be some very long-term damage done to the trees?
No, I'm saying property values. Like a cannabis grower that had the means to purchase the property and drove the property value up and then abandoned their permit or abandoned the cannabis industry and left, and that farmland was no longer accessible to traditional crop growers who weren't achieving the same profits as cannabis growers.
That would make parcels unaffordable.
Yes.
Yeah, so
that was
used
part
as
of
like
the
a market
reason.
manipulation technique? That's
No,
Or to mitigate the opposite.
mitigate that occurring.
So it would discourage cannabis from that location in general. So that
Right,
they
it was
wouldn't get
part of the
purchased.
context of when this was originally
I see.
drafted. Right, because it was kind of towards the beginning of cannabis legalization, and some people still feel, you know, that the cannabis industry, what is the longevity of the cannabis industry? And so that was taken into consideration when drafting this ordinance, is we aren't sure what the longevity of the cannabis industry is. We aren't sure, you know, what will happen when cannabis is fully legalized and everybody is jumping into a legal market. We're not sure what that'll do to crop prices, right? And so I think that was just important context as to one of the reasons this ordinance was drafted.
I see. Well, this is the time for task force discussion. Do we want to touch this with a 10-foot pole? Do we want to leave it alone? Do we want to take it out?
I mean, I'll say that I'm certainly receptive to the idea that pouring concrete over fertile ag ground does not protect fertile ag ground. So I don't know what potential workaround or amendment there might be in regards to that, but I will say that in general, because my job is to represent Lake County Farm Bureau and its membership, that our membership is not supportive of removing the farmland protection zone and these protections as outlined.
Have your members had any discussion regarding the foundations?
Not specifically, no. And I think that's a good point that's been raised, right? Maybe that's not necessarily a way to protect prime agricultural lands by pouring concrete over them. So, like I said, I'm receptive to that message, but generally when discussing this topic, our members are not supportive of completely removing it or making serious amendments.
Okay. Thank you.
Does the county allow greenhouses on permeable?
No, the greenhouse structure, just by the fact that it's a structure with weight that has to be engineered, would need a foundation to anchor it. Possibly, there could be a possible amendment to allow for hoop houses, but that doesn't take care of I mean, people would still be buying properties, but I'm not really sure. I haven't gotten a lot of input, just, offhandedly about that still being a concern. And I don't know that this is really the way to accomplish that, actually, because we're causing then a loss of prime ag soils in order to make a parcel less attractive.
If it's about the longevity, then.
And I think we've had a number of permittees show a significant investment that wasn't we're not so sure. I think that we've had a few years since this ordinance was passed to sort of have some experience to base going forward with this on. That doesn't
I mean, like longevity in terms of 8 years really longevity versus we have as like traditional farming and ranching that's been occurring for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I don't know how 8 years compares to that in terms of longevity.
8 years if they're forced to pour a foundation and walk away, then it's like, if they walk away and that's now back to regular ag land, it's now whoever buys it has to deal with the fact that there's a big old concrete slab on it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a project that does exist like that, where it is just a concrete slab in farmland protection zone. There is no infrastructure put in place other than a concrete slab, and the project has expired.
So this may not be accomplishing all of the goals that were originally, kind of the spirit of it.
Are there generally these parcels and lands, are there existing ag exempt structures that are on foundations? Was there processing and things going on where there were outbuildings and things like? I'm looking at you guys because you know the land better.
I do, but for I don't know, for what land are you talking about?
So if you're in the farmland protection zone and you had a vineyard, right? And does the farmland protection zone allow for outbuildings or bottling or those kinds of things that would also require the ground to be paved?
I don't know how everything's done, but like the largest area is the Big Valley area.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, think about it. There's the pear packing shed. There are wineries in that area. There's a lot of infrastructure.
Consistent with traditional agricultural uses.
Mm-hmm.
Ag exempt building structure permits don't have a prohibition on foundations, so the ones that I can think of usually have dirt floors, but it's not a rule.
But it's probably worth drawing a distinction between a pear packing shed and a winery versus an ag outbuilding. Like those are not, those are far from the same.
But if somebody was going to come in with like non-cannabis, like nursery or something else that required a greenhouse, they would do the same. They'd pour a foundation.
Yeah.
So I guess is it about protecting the soil then, or is it about protecting other industries besides cannabis?
I think it was multifaceted.
A combination.
Thoughts went into this. I don't think it was any one thing in particular. I think it was a lot of different things that were taken into consideration when this was devised.
I can hear Richmond in my head. So what was the science? What was the science that went into this discussion? Yeah, sorry.
I was thinking, but I'm not gonna say it. No, I'm a big data guy. Things that are lasting are based on facts and research. You can actually do something. But
I think it was a proactive policy. It was before we could have had any of the science done. And so we're also kind of at a lack because we didn't have a baseline of the effect. We were at a lack of being able to determine if it was effective. Plus, we had a lot of them just not do it.
A lot of what?
We had some FPZ permits that did not convert.
Right, with that, 6 were required to convert. 1 of those was revoked and 5 have yet to convert. So the conversions essentially was a failure.
And the revocation, that was not the prime part. It was just added in with revocation, that the basis for revocation request happened before that, and it was added in. This is what's happened since then. They haven't converted. So it was added in just as supplemental data, not so much this is why we need that revocation.
So what is going on with the projects that haven't converted?
They're going to expire likely due to inactivity.
So they're just not being used.
They're not being utilized.
So does that speak to like a change in the amount of demand there may be for parcels inside of the FPZs? I mean, it sounds like there aren't exactly swarms of people trying to get into those areas to work there if there are 5 sites that are not currently being used at all.
I think there could be a variety of things, just guessing, and Jennifer and Nara could add in, but if you've gotten a state license for type 3A or type 3 outdoor, you've got up to an acre, so you've worked your profit margins on that. But you go to mixed light and it all shrinks. Your expenses go up because the infrastructure you have to put in, and your canopy shrinks by a little more than half. So that significantly changes your business model. And I'm thinking that maybe a number of those permittees were not able to pivot that quickly or be able to make it work at that scale.
I'd be interested to hear from Robert on if there's any issues with traditional viewscapes and some of those other issues that I know that he's worked on in the past regarding cannabis, especially in the Big Valley area. I know obviously he's not here to provide context to any of that, but I would be interested to hear from him.
Just specific to cannabis, or specific also, because we do have a 50-foot ag structure allowance?
I was thinking specific to cannabis just because I've been to a number of planning commission hearings where he and other tribal community leaders have not supported the project due to reasons similar to those. So I was just curious how big of an issue that's been for them.
So if the requirement for greenhouses would impact the viewshed value to a tribe? Well, if we table this item, we can let him know that we had that particular question.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that he would be here.
He does try to make himself more available to these meetings when it looks like there's something that interfaces with tribal interests.
I thought he just didn't like us.
No, I don't know if he likes it or not.
He probably
yeah.
Maybe we could plan to get him to a future meeting to answer these questions. I'm not sure.
Michelle,
or maybe he doesn't care, then that's fine too.
Well, Michelle, could you just send him an email and let him know that this topic came up and this question came up in the discussion of FPZ? Did we want to set this aside or keep going? We have some public input that I would recommend we take before we decide.
Yeah, let's go to public.
Okay, anybody in the room? In Zoom, we've got Angela, then Margot, then Peter. Go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, Maria. I just wanted to, I'm kind of going back to when Ordinance 3101 was created in December of 2020, and the reasons the supervisors gave back then in their creation of this was to protect large systems of land that include some of the most important farmland or farmlands of importance to ensure the longevity of farmlands, and that even though cannabis is considered ag in the county, it's not an ag commodity. Also, the current FPZ areas are all AVAs. So, I don't know, maybe Catherine or Rebecca can speak to that with removing the FPZ. How is that going to affect the AVA? Thank you.
I do not anticipate any effect on an AVA. AVAs are established with the state because they signify unique micro...
TTB, actually.
TCB, thank you.
TTB. Yeah.
TGB, because they just identify a certain region as having unique, like mineral characteristics or things that are more specific and are appropriate to have greater attention paid than like the county-wide AVA, because we have a Lake County AVA.
Also, many of those AVAs were established prior to 2020, so.
Okay, so they're more soil based, created on the soil, climate, that kind of thing.
Right, and they just have to do with wine.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to give the background on the history of why the county created this. It wasn't just to, it's to protect farmland so that we can grow food. Thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead, Margot.
Thanks,
And
Maria.
Can I turn this over to you? Because I'm like hearing.
So mine is more of a question, and that is as an alternative to greenhouses and the concrete foundation, can concrete blocks be substituted? Because if an operation folds, removing concrete blocks would be easier than trying to jackhammer concrete. Thank you.
Thanks, Margot. I'm going to step out, Ruby, and I'm handing this herding cat's job over to Mary for the remainder of the time. I have a late pack. And I'll see Shoreline Lake Pack folks later on tonight. Thanks, everybody. Good rest of the day.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the drift issue. There's a sort of technical point, I think, to be made here. For years, the way I got to know Catherine Vanderwall was I, for years, went up to the ag department to take the exam, the pesticide application exam you have to take to get a permit to apply this stuff. And if you get into it and you study it, which is required by the state of California, I just want to make it clear to everybody, on a windy day, if you're using a sprayer out in a field, your material can drift hundreds of feet. This is just a well-established fact. And, I said windy day, and I said out in a field, you have a boom sprayer and you're going at it. You need to assume you could affect your neighbor hundreds of feet away. That's just basically very well established in the exam and in the study material that the state of California requires all of us to study in order to get these licenses. So I just wanted to make that really clear. This isn't meant to be prejudicial or express anger from one type of a farmer to another. It's just factually correct that drift is a serious issue on a windy day. And it can also be a serious issue when you have certain weather conditions, like an inversion, temperature-wise, in the morning. You'll get an inversion. The same thing as smoke and air quality. When you see the smoke go up and down. So you could spray and it could linger, and then it could blow later over to somebody's property and damage their crop. So I just ask everyone, who's thinking about this and wants to get informed about it, to really get informed about it. It's not as simple as you might think, and the risk is higher than you might think. Thank you.
Andrew.
Hey, Andrew Dubs Kramer. Just wanted to throw out a possible suggestion that might help to protect both soil and other crops, because it seems like we're really trying to protect both here. I would suggest that we might consider in FPZ zones actually allowing outdoor cultivation, but requiring 1,000-foot setback from the cultivation area to the offsite ag use that's in existence at the time of permitting. That would address this multiple hundreds of feet of spray drift while not requiring us to pour concrete on prime ag soils. It would allow for cannabis to be cultivated where there are established AVAs, which would help with cannabis appellations and help with the value of Lake County cannabis. And it would, from what I'm hearing, provide enough separation so that you wouldn't have this spray drift issue.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, bringing it back to the task force for discussion. Or the option to table the item because it was brought up that tribal input is something that would be helpful to necessitate this conversation. What are the thoughts from the task force?
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing from Robert on a couple of different things.
I'd like to hear what he says too on Andrew's suggestion as well. potential solution.
I mean, I think this is a issue that we've been anticipating discussing for essentially the life of the task force. So if we could have as full of a task force as possible, including Robert and fire district representatives, I think that that would be ideal.
And just to make a comment, Andrew's comment, I don't know that a 1,000-foot buffer would be sufficient because we do have some pesticides where there's a quarter-mile restriction and seasonality in place also. So I think if you were going to suggest like a buffer, it would have to be a quarter-mile.
And that would be 1,320 feet.
Whatever quarter-mile is.
Okay. Did anyone have any commentary? Okay. Well, with that, we can table this item and move on to the next item. Other focus topics identified by Cannabis Ordinance Task Force: incomplete, abandoned applications, and voluntary withdrawal. There are no current regulations within Article 27 related to abandoned applications or voluntary withdrawal. And that is voluntary withdrawal of an approved use permit, not for a pending application. We currently have the process to close out pending applications, but not to close out approved use permits without revocation or expiration. It's interesting to note that the state does have a process for incomplete and abandoned applications. It is DCC regulation subsection 15012, incomplete and abandoned applications. It reads, A, incomplete applications will not be processed. Applications will only be considered if complete if all of the information required under sections 15002 and 15011 is included. The department shall issue written notice to the applicant by mail, email, or through the department's licensing system, informing them the application is incomplete and identifying the information missing from the application. B, the applicant fails to submit all required information within 180 days from the date of the initial written notice, the application shall be deemed abandoned. C, if the applicant fails to submit payment of the license fee within 60 calendar days from the date of the abandoned request for payment of the license fee, application shall be deemed abandoned. And it goes on for things that do not specifically apply to the major use permit application process, because we do not go through the application to deem it complete without the application being paid. So some of these items will align with the Lake County zoning ordinance. Some will not, because we are proactive in this approach. But again, going back to the subsection B, if the applicant fails to submit all required information within 180 days from the initial date of the written notice, the application shall be deemed abandoned. This is something that staff had identified as being one of our main issues for having a significant pending backlog for these processing of applications, because there was no communication between the applicants and the department. We weren't getting responses to our incomplete letters, but we still have projects that we haven't heard from applicants in over 2 years. So if this were to be implemented, we would be able to close out those projects that are not moving forward.
Do you have a count on how many?
I can provide that to you.
Thank you. That's more out of curiosity.
I can tell you we have about 60 projects right now that are pending.
Okay.
Is this something that the task force wanted to discuss?
Yeah, I want to hear from you on this, but I'm generally, again, like, as you know, as much as we can conform and align with state law and simplify and align, and if that helps the county to move on and begin to process applications that are rather than continuing to send incomplete letters and attempting to reach out to folks that have no intention of continuing. Whatever can streamline the process here, and aligns with state law, something that I'm willing to support.
Okay. So the other element of this is the voluntary withdrawal. That is for the approved project. As previously mentioned, these projects will expire after 2 years of inactivity, but we have received calls into the department where people have said, I want to make the business decision to no longer pursue commercial cannabis. How do I close my use permit out without having to wait for 2 years? We do not currently have a mechanism to do so. So with that, staff has identified this as a potential issue for the task force to present a resolution.
What would you need from somebody to be able to close it out?
A notarized letter is my first thought. It wouldn't be a phone call or an email or anything like that. This would need to be a notarized documentation, proof from the original applicant in order to do so.
What does a business have to do? How do they do it right now? It's not really business, but they close the shop.
An everyday business would just shut their doors.
Their license and everything, the county just sits there.
They would just shut their doors.
Yeah.
It has been an issue for property where some potential of it's like somebody coming in and take like a landlord or whatever landowner coming in to take something back from the applicant who was the renter on site. And it gets really hairy in terms of like then they have to purchase the permit and the state permit. They can't start a new project because the other one is still in progress.
Just a question, are applicants such as these holding a place that would otherwise go to another applicant farther down the list? Like, no, that's not what's going on.
No, this is not like, only so many use permits are available, so if one becomes inactive, somebody else can get it. What it does is kind of clog up staff time.
Sure.
Because we're reviewing these over and over and over again and resubmitting any correspondence to these individuals. And with all of these approved use permit projects, they all require compliance monitoring. So if these projects are abandoned, staff is still reaching out until we can expire 2 years later for compliance monitoring requirements, which is the performance report that's due every year on June 1st, the compliance monitoring fee that's due every year on June 1st, and then scheduling the site visit. And with that, staff does send out mailers 60 days in advance. And then we also call people multiple times, send multiple emails in an effort to get in contact with these folks who have no real interest in pursuing.
And is this something that's been expressed maybe by the industry, or is this something that industry would want also?
The voluntary withdrawal is something that I think, unfortunately, people would be interested in, particularly landowners, saying, hey, we're coming back in and taking over your lease, and we need you to sign a voluntary. We need you to send this letter to the county so that we can move forward with the parcel, with our own application or not. But there's, I've heard that, definitely, on at least a couple parcels. So, Jen, what I haven't heard, and that's what I was looking at Jen about it, was is there anybody that you think would be upset about the whole 100, you have 180 days and you don't get back to us, then you're being abandoned? Yeah.
So again, with this, when the Board of Supervisors signed Urgency Ordinance 3106 that required hydrological analysis and drought management plans, staff essentially notified every pending applicant of the new requirements. Some of those folks complied right away. Others have still not submitted this documentation 2 years and 4 months later. With that, as long as we have that communication saying, hey, I'm working on this, I can't get it to you in 6 months because of X, Y, and Z, but I still want to keep my application listed as pending for whatever reason they have, we will keep that open. It could be not having a hydrological analyst being able to prepare that report within that time frame. As long as there's correspondence and transparency and communications and the department understands that this person is interested in pursuing the major use permit or minor use permit, then we would keep that project open. But if there's no correspondence or response to our correspondence, at that time, this is the type of project that we would want to close out.
Is there any public comment on this? You just know we're 6 minutes from the close of our meeting.
Right.
Zoom.
No public comment? So is that something that the task force would like to consider, is align with state regulations for subsection 15012 incomplete and abandoned applications?
Yes. And the voluntary withdrawal.
And the voluntary withdrawal. Okay. Can we get a motion?
So moved. You want to, I mean,
is there any way that we could see a draft of what that actual state language is that we're voting to align with, and just start our next meeting by making that motion and getting that?
Sure, we can add the language into the next meeting. That way you guys can make the motion for the next meeting.
Yeah, I'm just hesitant to, without seeing anything, right?
Sure.
Makes sense.
Not that I disagree, but.
Okay.
So I just have to go to my LACAC meeting. All
right, with that, we will leave this one open for next meeting. With that, the added language from section 15012. Is there any other additional topics for the task force?
We have language on voluntary withdrawal, so we can get on that as well. Since we only have 5 minutes, should we go to public comment?
Yeah.
And any public comment?
Michelle, it's not really related to this item. I just want to let everybody know I did email Robert Geary to see if he could make the next meeting, which would be the 15th. It's Monday's holiday.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so do I have the authority to close the meeting early?
If you need a motion, I'll do it.
Okay, thank you guys. We're gonna conclude the meeting for today. And we will pick up on our next scheduled date, which is next Monday.
No.
Right? Or is it the 15th? Sorry, Friday. Friday the 15th, from 1 to 4.